We are but rats in the labyrinth of life searching for an exit. Oh, but not me. I'm more like one of those rats dragging the New York slice around. Everyone loves me no matter how much disease I spread. Today's topic is about music, science, mice, science mice, and Lyndon LaRouche for some ungodly reason. Now let's take a journey down memory lane. And to think that used to be the name of this show. Not no more, it ain't. In the fall of 1997, my language arts teacher brought in an article that one of her well-meaning colleagues had forwarded her through email. She passed out copies and we were greeted by this: Mozart or rock? For these mice, it was a no-brainer. Mice listening to rock tripled the time they took to navigate a maze. Mice hearing Mozart cut their time from 10 to 1.5 minutes. Okay, good for them. Our class was confused. This really deviated from our usual non-sequitur lesson plans that typically involved puppets telling us not to do drugs. You can see how effective that was. So we read the mice article aloud. Your mom was right, but don't tell her that. Rock and roll really does rot your brain. That's according to David Merrill, a 16-year-old Ned River High School student whose high school science experiment supports what parents have been saying for years. Hard rock taints the brain. Well, at least the brains of mice. Using 72 male laboratory mice, a stopwatch, a 5x3 foot maze, and the music of Mozart and Anthrax, David worked with an Old Dominion University statistician to establish that hard rock impedes learning. Notice that the article has instilled in the reader 4 times that rock and roll is bad for you before it presents evidence. In the process, the rising junior captured top honors in regional and state science fairs and earned accolades from the Navy and the Cleavage Inspection Agency. Don't let your kids listen to hard rock music, he said. I think it has a major negative effect. To prove his point, David assembled 3 separate groups of 24 mice: a control group, a hard rock group, and a classical group. The mice spent the first week getting used to their controlled environment in David's parents' basement. They received measured feedings and 12 hours of light each day. So they really were living the gamer life. Let's fucking go! Each mouse navigated the maze to establish the base time of about 10 minutes. Then David started piping in music 10 hours a day. The control group navigated without music. He put each mouse through the maze 3 times a week for 3 weeks. The results? The control group shaved 5 minutes from its original time. The mice that navigated the maze with Mozart knocked 8.5 minutes off their time. Wait, hold on. That sentence structure makes it sound like the mice were running in the maze with Mozart. But the group listening to hard rock bumped through the maze, dazed and confused, taking an average of 30 minutes, tripling the amount of time it previously took to complete the maze. Most noticeably, the hard rock mice didn't sniff the air to find the trails of others that came before them. Hard rock mice, that goes so hard. It was like the music dulled their senses, David said. It shows point blank that hard rock has a negative effect all around. I can't think of a positive effect that hard rock has on learning. Specifically, it was the album Stomp 442. Whether that's a good representative for all heavy metal, I'll let you decide. During the 4-month experiment, David housed each mouse in separate aquariums. That's because last year, for a similar project, he kept all the hard rock mice together. The results were horrific. I had to cut my project short because all the hard rock mice killed each other. I feel like I read an alternate version of this article that specified that the rock group all ate each other. But maybe that was the Ethel Cain group. David's awards include first place in the behavioral science, yada yada blah, 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 who cares. David himself isn't a fan of hard rock, so this discovery won't affect his lifestyle too much. But other teens may feel the heat. Moral of the story? Rock and roll is bad and Mozart will make you smart because mice. Actually, the real result of this article is that my whole class was united in our hatred of David. Real teacher if you got the homework vibes. Oh, but he received accolades from the Navy and CIA. Well, so did Noriega, and look how that turned out. Our language arts teacher was a bit of an old-fashioned type, and I think she was trying to kill hard rock for us. And yes, I can hold a grudge for 30 plus years. But from what I've seen, this article went viral. Every educator and regressive fogey latched onto this story because it villainized an art form long suspected of promoting violence, hedonism, and smoking. This particular article originates from the Virginia Pilot and was written by food writer Lorraine Eaton, and that's the perfect name for a food writer. Coward not to call your column What Ya Eatin'. The Mice article is a very accessible news feature. That is to say, written for idiots, as it reads more like a gossip column than science journalism. But I suppose the Virginia Pilot knew its audience. But David didn't come up with the whole Mozart brain food theory. That started years before with a study now dubbed the Mozart effect. First, a disclaimer. I am not a science expert, believe it or not. But I did watch and enjoy Interstellar, which means I am a genius. And I invested millions in NFTs. Can't wait to see how those are doing. 1973. The year of the Saturday Night Massacre, Roe vs. Wade, and Digby, the biggest dog in the world. That year, a physicist named Gordon Shaw became fascinated with spatial reasoning and shifted his focus away from particles man and towards the outside brain. Spatial reasoning gives us the ability to accurately comprehend our surroundings and perceive the transformation of objects. As Alfred Binet described it, spatial reasoning is necessary for higher brain functions like music, complex math, and chess. And probably assembling your shitty IKEA furniture. Ha! Look at that asshole, can't even get his IKEA furniture together. There we go. Shaw believed that we have the ability to immediately recognize patterns and symmetry if only we could calibrate our focus into superior pattern recognition. With programmer Xiaodan Lang, he helped create the Tryon model brain emulation that assigned musical notes to the patterns of mental stimulations. They found that the resulting sequence of notes sounded eerily similar to Western classical music. So Shaw formed a new hypothesis. If brain patterns resemble classical music, could classical music supercharge the brain? Shaw joined forces with psychologist and concert cellist Francis Rauscher at the University of California, Irvine to study the effect of classical music on college students. Ah yes, college students, the most expendable resource. The experiment involved splitting the students into 3 groups and making them solve abstract spatial puzzles. But before entering the puzzle place, Group 1, the control group, would sit in silence for 10 minutes. Group 2 would listen to 10 minutes of Mozart's Sonata for 2 pianos in D major potassium bunch of numbers. And Group 3 would listen to a relaxation tape.
Turn tape over.
While the relaxation group showed no improvement over the control group, the Mozart group showed significant improvement in solving the puzzles. A follow-up experiment was run a few years later with more test subjects and more variables, and I'd like to focus on this one because it shows clear results. And it's not behind a ridiculous paywall. Once again, the subjects were divided into 3 groups: Mozart, Silencio por favor, and Miscellaneous. On day 1, all 3 groups sat in silence for 10 minutes and then were given paper folding puzzles. You know, these things where you have to figure out how to fold the paper and create different patterns that I don't know how I'm supposed to. On day 2, the Mozart group was subjected to the dueling piano potassium song or whatever, while the 3rd group was given a new recording every day. On day 2, it was Philip Glass's Music with Changing Parts. On day 3, it was an audiobook of The Chief by Melissa Bank. On day 4, it was British-style trance music. I'm surprised this group didn't eat each other. You can see the results of the experiment here. And I should preface it by saying that in data analytics, minute fluctuations don't tell us anything. We want to look at distinguishing patterns, things that indicate causation, like what happens in the Mozart group on day 2. Pretty significant, right? All groups improved by day 3, but that's probably attributed to all the participants getting good at the paper puzzles. What you'll notice is that while the Mozart group still performed the best, they never reached the same level of improvement as day 2. Later researchers expanded on this. In the Journal of Royal Society of Medicine, and that is a hell of a title, Jason Jenkins writes that brains engaged in spatial temporal tasks were mapped by PET scans and found that the activated areas overlap with those involved with music processing. Quote, "It is suggested, therefore, that listening to music would prime the activation of those areas of the brain which are concerned with spatial reasoning."
We think that the Mozart effect can be described as sort of a tuning up or a structural organization of these neural pathways.
And it wasn't just Mozart. Other studies found similar results with Bach, Chopin, and Yanni. That one's not a joke, that's actually in the paper. Essentially, any complex composition with gradual repetition would enhance the brain's spatial temporal performance. In their paper, Rausch, Shaw, and the rest of the Apple Dumpling gang emphasized that the performance enhancement gained from listening to Mozart was slight and very temporary. Think of it as a minor stat buff in an RPG that lasts 2 turns.
Why does it only last for 10 minutes in your estimation?
Because it's just a listening effect.
It's passive rather than active. You're not really making music, you're just listening to it.
While the results of the study weren't anything reality-shattering, they did imply a fascinating correlation between music and our ability to perceive the visual world, and such data could help us further understand the psychology of spatial reasoning. As Dr. Shaw said, listening to Mozart is a mental calisthenics, not a magic potion that makes you smart. Can you guess how the mainstream media reported this? Newspapers all over the country were eager to report that listening to Mozart for 10 minutes a day improved IQ scores, making you into some kind of ubermensch. How did Einstein get so smart? He listened to Mozart. Where did Spider-Man get his powers? He listened to Mozart. How did Bob make his dick hard and satisfy his wife? Amadeus, Amadeus. One infamous article by music writer Alex Ross in the New York Times states, IQ scores of college students rose 9 points after exposure to 10 minutes of Mozart. Now they have shown that Mozart assists in the solution of spatial puzzles involving folded cutout shapes. But you may have noticed that the original study never mentioned IQ tests directly. Rather, the folded paper test is a component of most IQ exams. But this Alex Ross article wasn't meant to report on the miraculous discovery of musical Viagra for your brain. It was meant to remark on the role of classical music on modern society. Of 1994. Ross later writes, the whole problem nowadays is that the great composers are linked to superficial images of luxury, that they serve as elevator music for the upwardly mobile. Mozart has become a sort of musical Prozac. Well, I said Viagra, but same diff. Also, I like this line. If Mozart were alive today, he'd be dead. So true, King. It's obviously more of a humor column, but most readers are going to hit that first paragraph and decide, this is all I need. I don't need to read any further. Mozart makes you smart and science said it, so it must be true, and I didn't misinterpret anything. A strange outcome of this experiment happened in 1998. Georgia Governor Zell Miller proposed a $105,000 budget to buy every school kid in the state a collection of classical music on tape or CD, plus shipping and handling, sorry, no CODs. Apparently, Governor Miller played Beethoven's Ode to Joy on the State House floor and asked all the representatives if they felt smarter. Do you feel smarter, my Vonne Droogs, or do you feel like partaking in a bit of ultraviolence in the old in-out, real ho-show-like? End quote. Florida did something similar because anything Georgia does, Florida gotta do too, but stupider. Can't afford to feed these kids, but we sure as hell can give them Yanni. Speaking of stupid, writer, or whatever he is, Don Campbell copyrighted the phrase Mozart effect in 1997 and wrote a New Age book about how music can change your life, just like an overrated Shin song. Tapping the power of music to heal the body, strengthen the mind, and unlock the creative spirit. Or wreck it all in a Shikai Bardo sequence by listening to British trance music. The choice is yours. Another byproduct of the Mozart effect that I can think of is the Baby Einstein franchise. It's a series of home videos that shows colorful shit on the screen while classical music plays. And if you skip season 1, forget it, the plot is impossible to follow. To be fair, the creator of Baby Einstein, former teacher Julie Clark, just wanted to introduce toddlers to the beauty of nature and art from the comfort of their own home. And yes, it was born from the idea that exposing children to classical music could enhance certain aspects of their brain.
Her motivation stems from a growing body of research that shows connections in the brain begin forming at a fast and furious rate even while the baby is still in the womb.
But the science wasn't fully understood, and calling the tapes Baby Einstein implied that the tapes were guaranteed to Tokyo Drift your baby into a mathematical genius. Or at the very least turn them into Death Destroyer of Worlds. So much so that the Campaign for a Commercial-Free Childhood, aka the Paid Subscription Tier Childhood, filed a complaint against the Baby Einstein Company for duping parents into believing that consuming television was beneficial to nurturing their child's mind. Studies have shown that the opposite was true, that children under 2 should not watch any TV. Y'all were there showing them Baby Shark for 23 hours a day? So then we arrive at David Merrill's mouse experiment. The mass market consuming public already believed that classical music made you smart, but now they had an additional point, that rock and roll makes you stupid. From my own experience, the repercussions of this were minor. A lot of pretentious go-getter types started listening to chamber ensembles while they studied, as though they were absorbing nutrients through photosynthesis. Huh. Botany analogy. Maybe this shit does make you smart. Never mind, it's gone. Further experiments failed to replicate the results of the 1993 study. In 1999, multiple papers claimed that the improvements displayed by the Mozart group were so minimal and so specific to one task that they lacked credibility. A research report printed by the American Psychological Society concluded that there is little evidence to support basing intellectual intervention programs on the existence of the Mozart effect. So it's more like baby snake oil. But remember, Rauscher and Shaw and the gang didn't make the kind of claims that the study became synonymous with. They just wanted to find a correlation between cerebral functions and mental stimulations in a very specific part of the brain under very specific circumstances. It was all y'all that got carried away. Marina Krakowski wrote in the Stanford Business Magazine that researchers found that the Mozart effect received the most newspaper mentions in those US states with the weakest educational systems. Don't make me get that map out again. Giving tentative support to the previously untested notion that rumors and legends grow in response to public anxiety. And as the findings spread through lay culture over the years, it got watered down and grossly distorted. And that's it, really. The more vulnerable, undereducated areas latched onto a get smart quick scheme without further questioning the context of the study. When people don't have the home skills of rational skepticism and instead maneuver through the public sphere like frightened cattle adhering to ancient dogma, they consume whatever digestible information gets dumped into their trough, regardless of accuracy. But what about David's heavy metal mouse experiment? First of all, I think we can all agree that blasting 10 hours of anthrax at a living creature is animal abuse. Probably a war crime. Well, no wonder the government liked this kid so much. Oh, and in case you're wondering why David chose Anthrax of all bands, it's because he went to Kmart and asked the clerk for good heavy metal. No music critic I trust more than the Blue Light Special. Wait, Stomp 442 came out in 1994, so it was a new release at this time and not charting very well. Oh my god, this clerk totally just pawned off their overstock on David. I asked the clerk what every boy was listening to. But the young student still relished in the notoriety, even presenting his findings at a symposium in Washington, D.C., which you can watch on the Lyndon LaRouche Archive channel. Ah, Lyndon LaRouche, one of those people of all time. He championed classical music and hated contemporary music. He even hated the Beatles because he thought they were a CIA plant. I mean, they were, but they were still fab. Merrill concludes that, when talking about heavy metal, the music alone was bad enough, much less the lyrics, which the people are subjected to, but the mice weren't. And that's something that I think is pretty significant as well. But what no one here is talking about, and the part that really pisses me off as an artist, is that mice experience music so much differently than humans. Humans understand that we are listening to a recording created by musicians, crafted by engineers, and etched onto a compact disc for entertainment purposes. Mice just hear noise, like, look at the natural habitat of rodents. Grassy meadows, babbling brooks, the chirps of birds and crickets. Bright, upbeat sounds layered and rhythmic, somewhat similar to classical music. Mice aren't living in complete silence, nor are they inundated by the caterwauling guitar of Scott Ian. The mice in the heavy metal group were probably stressed out because they had no idea why all this thunder and fox-eye screaming wouldn't stop. If nothing else, the data from this experiment just proves that unnatural noise is bad for the health of mice. In fact, later experiments did prove just that. Urban noise, like traffic and road construction, caused mice to spike their cortisol levels, often leading to defensiveness and despondency. So yeah, the mice didn't turn into violent thugs because of the loose morals of thrash metal, but because they were constantly in fight or flight mode. Getting back to the repercussions of Merrill's experiment on my classroom setting, did listening to Mozart help improve test scores? Did hard rock deter improvement? Well, I actually did get into classical music around this time because of that Virginia Pilot article. Yeah, that's right. I was one of those pretentious douchebags. Not anymore, of course. I got better. But I began to listen to Bach, Beethoven, Vivaldi, and of course our friend Wolfie Amadeus, and discovered that I actually love me some classical music. But it had the opposite effect on my studies. You see, this was my first real exposure to this genre, so when the music started up, I would get lost in the ethereal dark forest of the composition. And 10 minutes later, I'd have read nothing. More recent studies have found that the best music to study to is whatever you're familiar with. It's not distracting, and the familiar tones and rhythm can be comforting, helping you stay focused. And that's exactly what I did. I started listening to the albums I had on heavy rotation, and my grades improved. And what were those albums? Linkin Park's Hybrid Theory and Prodigy's Fat of the Land. Don't laugh, I was in middle school, I hadn't developed my palate yet. So yeah, that's right, David. Smack my bitch up, help me get through algebra.
Mom, I got an A. That's great.
But there's so much variety out there that it comes down to the individual and their tastes and experiences. One criticism of the so-called Mozart effect is a cultural one. It's not that Mozart's music makes you smarter, but listening to the music instills in you the cultural connotations of a scholarly genius. All those hoity-toity brainy scientists playing chess and listening to chamber orchestras on their gramophones while staring at globes or something. Remember Governor Zell Miller? After playing Ode to Joy, he asked if everyone felt smarter, accidentally admitting that the whole thing is mind over matter. In the Shaw-Rausch experiment, Test subjects in the Mozart group may have felt encouraged to activate their inherent problem-solving skills because they listened to Mozart, and it made them feel like classy, smart people. Meanwhile, the test subjects in the Philip Glass group were probably like, what the hell is this? And finally, something that has been bothering me this whole time, all of these studies treat Mozart like a genre rather than a, artist. He had layers and variety, writing symphony, solo, chamber, and even opera, all of which have different effects on the brain. Some calming and some invigorating. In fact, so many of these classical composers evoke a lot of the same violence and bombast as hard rock. Stravinsky's The Firebird is legit scary. Even Mozart can be metal as hell. Have you listened to All Parts of the Magic Flute? Or Don Giovanni, in which the protagonist is dragged to hell by the man he killed? Spoiler alert. Damn, that music still gives me chills. If those mice had been listening to the conclusion of Don Giovanni, they wouldn't have been running a maze, but on their knees repenting for their sins to their mouse god. To sum it up, Merrill's study did prove that shrill noise like heavy metal was detrimental to mice, but his conclusion about heavy metal rotting our human brains was unfounded. A lot of people brought this up in that Lyndon LaRouche archive, and by the way, the admin of that channel is a total sassy bitch. One commenter says, "Incorrect sample sizes make these alleged studies irrelevant. Nice try, kiddo. Take your bias elsewhere." The admin replies, "This has nothing to do with math. He made a hypothesis about music's effects on animals and went through the lengthy process of testing it out. Not bad for a young guy. Take your bias against science elsewhere." Swish. And Ziggy Stardust Kitty points out that the experimenter came into this with a bias, and also that mice are prey animals. Someone else adds to this that, yeah, mice experience stress from sounds differently. The admin responds, "So you're upset that your music is being exposed for what it is?" Well, I will say this as somebody who loves Mozart and hates anthrax.
This experiment's conclusion is bullshit.
And anyone who shared the news article as proof that heavy metal lowers your intelligence is guilty of spreading misinformation. 30-year grudge. I'm not even a metalhead, but damn it, I will defend it. So what I'm getting at is that David Merrill's project was all a fraud and he didn't deserve the accolades. Science unfair. Hold on, let me touch grass. That's better, my head is cleared. You know what, I take it all back. The point of a science fair project is to prove that the student is capable of following the scientific process of testing a hypothesis in a controlled environment and drawing data and conclusions from said experiments. And he did that. That LaRouche douche was right. Not bad for a young guy. And though I disagree with his conclusion, it is a fair assessment of the facts given the dataset within the confines of a school project. What is not okay is how full-grown adults exaggerated the story into such a colossus of pseudoscience. But, I mean, what's the worst that happens? Children listen to good music? Well, let's think about this in the context of another study. In 1998, the FDA began a reassessment of the compound thiormosol, which was used as a preservative in vaccines. A major component of thiormosol is ethyl mercury. New EPA standards, new for 1998, had lowered the amount of mercury allowed in products. And it's like a tiny, tiny amount. But all the recommended vaccines combined exceeded the allotted amount of mercury dictated by the EPA. So public health sectors, in a move mostly motivated by bureaucracy, began to phase thiormosol out of vaccines in favor of newer compounds. But news reports exaggerated the supposed dangers of the thiormosol, and the public did what it does best. Panic. Informal researchers claim to find a link between an excess of mercury in the body and autism. The theory being that autism is caused by nerve cells not communicating because they are gunked up by mercury. Formal studies found that that's not a real thing. And despite what discredited whack jobs like Dr. Andrew Wakefield and Jenny McCarthy claim, vaccines do not cause autism. But that didn't stop panicky idiots from turning vaccines into a scapegoat, placing fear into something they didn't understand because they didn't have the obscure to blithely explain it to them. As a result, we now have anti-vax movements as well as measles outbreaks, so that just demonstrates the dangers of latching onto misinformation. We all love to feel special, like we're all life's protagonists who have discovered the secret that they don't want you to know. But if you're embracing half-truths and not educating yourself on the facts, then you're no better than a mouse lost in a maze, thinking that you know where you're going. I think that science and classical music have a lot in common. They're complex processes that often get misconstrued by an audience trying to fast-track their experience. Whether it's reading a news headline and believing you've gained the same information as reading a scientific journal, or listening to a few minutes of the piano potassium number song and believing you understand the full oeuvre of the artist, such compositions of science and music cannot be shorthanded and must be experienced in full. This is about AI. So in conclusion, I believe that David Merrill's mouse experiment proves one vital, scientifically sound axiom. Anthrax sucks. Anthrax fans, I'm kidding, maybe. Thank you for your attention. You may now resume your petty tasks, lay people. But not before dropping me a like and subscribe. If you run the Lyndon LaRouche Archive channel, blink twice if you need help. As for the rest of you, I'll see you in the next one of these things that I make. Bye!